My wife could tie her own shoelaces for 6 weeks before I ever found out about it. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. I sat with it in a hospital parking garage in Pittsburgh with my hands shaking so bad I couldn't get the key into the ignition. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the 7 months that came before it. My name is Michael Dawson. I'm 36 years old. I've been a working electrician for 14 years, and up until this past spring, I thought I had a pretty solid read on my own life. I grew up in Bloomfield, one of those tight little Pittsburgh neighborhoods where every grandmother makes the same 3 cookies and every uncle has a strong opinion about the Steelers' offensive line. I married Emily Coyle, Emily Dawson now, 34 years old, 9 years ago, in a backyard ceremony in Squirrel Hill with string lights and a folding table that collapsed under the cake before anyone got a slice. Emily was, and still is, genuinely talented. She worked as an interior designer at a downtown firm called Bellwether Interiors, and clients used to specifically request her by name because she had a gift for turning a cramped, shady-side row house into something that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. I used to tease her that she made more money picking out doorknobs than I did rewiring an entire house from the studs out. She'd throw a couch cushion at me every single time, without fail. Like it was written into our marriage contract. I didn't know it yet, but that career she was so proud of had already quietly collapsed behind a door I was never allowed to look through. Last August, on a Saturday morning that started like any other, Emily was driving home from a client walkthrough in Oakland when a delivery truck ran a red light on 5th Avenue and hit her car broadside. I got the call while I was up on a ladder in Lawrenceville, running new circuits through an old plaster ceiling, and I genuinely don't remember the drive to the hospital. I remember the fluorescent lights in the waiting room. I remember a vending machine humming somewhere down the hall like it had no idea the entire shape of my life was rearranging itself 20 feet away. And I remember a trauma surgeon finally walking out, still in scrubs, telling me Emily had a spinal fracture at the L1 vertebra, that the surgical team had stabilized it, and that there was, his exact words, a real possibility of permanent lower body impairment. She woke up 2 days later. She couldn't feel her legs. I'm not going to pretend the months that followed were anything but hell. Physical therapy 3 afternoons a week at a rehab center out in Squirrel Hill. A wheelchair that flat out did not fit through our bathroom doorway until I tore the frame out myself on a Sunday afternoon with a crowbar. More sheer frustration than actual carpentry skill, and Emily laughing from the hallway despite everything, telling me I looked like a man fighting a war against drywall. Insurance calls that put me on hold for 40 straight minutes just to be told a claim was still under review. And through all of it, Emily's mother, Patricia Coyle, moved into our guest room for what she called a temporary stretch. A temporary stretch that by the time this story starts had already lasted 7 full months. Patricia is 61 years old, sharp as broken glass, and has never once in her life been wrong about anything, according to Patricia. She took over my kitchen within a week. She rearranged my spice rack alphabetically without asking. She let me know, in 100 small comments dressed up as helpful advice, that she'd always privately thought her daughter married beneath her station. I didn't love having her in my house, but I understood it. Emily needed help getting through the day, and somebody had to be there while I was out working. I still remember one particular physical therapy session out of the maybe 60 we sat through together at that rehab center in Squirrel Hill. The therapist, a patient woman named Holly, who never once lost her calm even when Emily broke down crying halfway through a set of leg lifts, would guide Emily's ankles through the motion herself, over and over, narrating what the muscles were supposed to be doing, even though nothing below Emily's waist responded. I'd sit in a plastic chair against the wall, still in my work boots, watching my wife's face twist with the effort of trying to make a toe move that hadn't moved in weeks. I clapped for every small flicker Holly swore she saw. I meant every bit of that applause. I had no idea, sitting in that chair, that somewhere in the months ahead, those flickers would turn into full strides taken behind my back, in rooms I was never invited into. At home, the rhythm settled into something almost bearable, if exhausting. Patricia ran the household during the day, meals, laundry, getting Emily from the bed to the chair and back, while I covered the money end of things across 2 jobs and whatever sleep I could steal in between. Some mornings I'd come home from an overnight hotel shift just as Patricia was starting the coffee. And she'd look at me over her reading glasses like I'd tracked mud onto her clean floor, even though it was, in fact, my floor. "You look like something the cat dragged in and then thought better of," she told me once, not unkindly, just matter of fact, in that flat delivery she used for almost everything. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. There's coffee. Real coffee. Not that instant sludge you two drink." I'll give her this much. The coffee was good. Almost everything else about those 7 months was not. That second job is the whole reason I'm sitting here telling you this story at all. By the 2nd month after the accident, the medical bills had chewed straight through what little savings we had left. I picked up part-time overnight work as a night auditor at the Kensington Grand, a hotel downtown near the convention center, doing 4 10-hour shifts a week, stacked right on top of my full days running electrical jobs across the city. I'd wrap up a wiring job around 5 in the afternoon, eat a gas station sandwich in the cab of my truck, and clock in behind the hotel's front desk by 11 at night. I was tired in a way I didn't know a human body could physically be tired. But Emily needed a second surgical consult with a spinal specialist out in Cleveland, and the numbers that specialist's office quoted made my stomach drop straight through the floor. I would have worked 3 jobs if it meant there was even a slim chance she'd walk again someday. The delivery truck that hit her was owned by a regional logistics company, and their commercial insurer had settled with Emily's personal injury attorney back in the fall. Faster than either of us expected. The red light footage from a nearby traffic camera made fault about as clear-cut as these things ever get. The settlement wasn't one lump check. Given the severity of the injury, it was structured 2 ways: an upfront payment that covered immediate medical costs and legal fees, and a separate monthly disability payment on top of that, meant to replace her lost income for as long as her impairment continued and was medically documented. That second part, the monthly payments, was the piece that mattered most to our day-to-day survival. It was also the piece nobody thought to stop once she didn't need it anymore. Even with that monthly disability money coming in, it wasn't enough on its own. Between the mortgage, the upfront settlement money already spent on the ramp and the doorframe repair, and that second surgical consult in Cleveland that our regular insurance wouldn't fully cover. The math simply didn't work without a second income, which is exactly why the hotel job existed in the first place. Here's the part that still makes me laugh now, in that bitter, hollowed-out way where it isn't really funny at all. I used to come home from an overnight shift, completely wrecked, and I'd sit on the edge of our bed just to watch her sleep for a minute before collapsing beside her. She has no idea how much I'd do for her, I remember thinking, more than once. I had absolutely no idea at the time how right I was and how completely backwards. Emily's paralysis wasn't the only thing being hidden from me in that house. I just didn't know it yet. About 8 months before the accident, Emily had quietly been let go from Bellwether Interiors. At the time, she told me it was downsizing, a slow season, budget cuts, nothing personal. I believed her, because why on earth wouldn't I? She still opened her laptop every morning. She still took what sounded like client calls in the other room. What I didn't know, and wouldn't know for a long time, was that Bellwether's internal audit had discovered nearly $40,000 in client renovation deposits, quietly funneled out of the project accounts Emily managed, and redirected into her mother's name to cover gambling debts Patricia had piled up at 2 different casinos across the state line. Bellwether chose not to press charges publicly. Bad for the firm's reputation, easier all around just to cut ties quietly. Instead, through their lawyer, they offered Emily a private restitution agreement that same month, full repayment on a structured schedule, in exchange for her silence and theirs. She'd signed it before the accident ever happened. But with no real income and nothing but a part-time freelance gig to her name, she'd barely made a dent in it by the time the delivery truck hit her car. What the accident settlement did months later was finally give her the money to actually finish paying it off. Emily never told me a word of that. Not before the accident. Not after it either, so when I tell you she was sitting on a second secret buried underneath the first one, I mean it in the fullest sense. The wheelchair, the physical therapy schedule, the entire exhausting architecture of her recovery, It gave her something she never once said out loud, not even to herself, I think, a permanent excuse to never go back to work. Never explain the gap on her resume, never risk me eventually asking the one question she could not survive answering out loud. Why did you actually leave Bellwether, Emily? I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew, on a rare Saturday off from both jobs in the middle of March, was that an old friend named Ryan Coleman had been texting me for 2 straight weeks, insisting I finally come see the hotel he was managing out in Shadyside. Ryan and I met in trade school when we were both 19, back when we were both convinced we'd be running our own contracting company by 25. Life had entirely different plans for both of us. He drifted into hospitality management. I stayed buried in wire conduit and circuit panels. But we'd stayed close over the years. He now ran the front desk at a boutique property called the Harrow House Hotel, a beautifully restored Victorian on Ellsworth Avenue, known for weekend spa packages and quiet, understated luxury. Emily had actually designed a lobby refresh years earlier for a sister property of theirs downtown, long before any of this happened. Pittsburgh is a small city that way. Everything eventually connects to everything else. Just come by on your day off, Ryan had texted again for the 4th time that week. I'll walk you around, we'll grab coffee in the lounge, it'll take 20 minutes tops. I told Emily I'd be back by early afternoon. She was set up in the living room in her wheelchair. A blanket draped over her legs even though it was March and our radiators were doing more than their job, watching something on her laptop with a single earbud in, half paying attention. She gave me a small wave without fully looking up from the screen. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last completely ordinary goodbye we would ever have as husband and wife. I drove the 15 minutes to Shadyside with the windows cracked, some classic rock station humming low on the radio, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether Ryan's hotel bar made a decent cup of coffee. I want you to remember exactly how ordinary that drive was, because what waited on the other side of it would take that ordinary Saturday afternoon and split my entire life clean in half, into a before and an after. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The Harrow House Hotel smelled like fresh paint and old money. The good kind of old restored crown molding overhead. A lobby chandelier that probably cost more than my truck, and both of Ryan's cars combined. Ryan met me at the front desk in a sharp navy vest, grinning at me exactly the way he used to across a trade school workbench. "Look at you, Mr. Businessman," I told him, shaking his hand. "Look at you, mister, I work 2 jobs and still somehow look like a ghost." "You good, man? You look like you haven't slept since the Steelers last won a Super Bowl." "That was 2009, Ryan." My exact point. He walked me through the restored lobby, past a converted library that now served as a bar, out onto a rooftop patio that looked down over the tree line of Ellsworth Avenue, the whole neighborhood laid out green and quiet below us. We were laughing about a disastrous ceiling fan installation I'd botched in his apartment back in trade school. I'd shorted out an entire floor of his building trying to save him $40. When Ryan's radio crackled with a housekeeping request about a checkout on the 2nd floor. 2 minutes, he told me, already walking backward toward the stairs. "Grab a coffee at the bar. I'll be right back." I didn't grab a coffee. I wandered instead, the way you do in a genuinely beautiful old building, running my hand along restored woodwork, admiring the joints on a staircase somebody clearly cared about. I found myself standing near the base of that main staircase, looking up at the 2nd floor landing, when I heard a laugh drift down toward me. I knew that laugh instantly. 9 years of marriage does that to a person. I stood there for a full 3 seconds, genuinely confused. Because the laugh I knew belonged to a woman who could not, according to every single doctor we'd seen in the past 7 months, climb a staircase unassisted. My brain scrambled to build me a reasonable explanation. Maybe it's someone who just sounds like her. Maybe I'm exhausted and hearing things, while my legs, without waiting for permission from the rest of me, started carrying me up the stairs. The door to room 214 was standing open a few inches, a room service cart shoved half into the hallway like whoever delivered it hadn't pulled the door shut behind them yet. I nudged it open another few inches without even thinking about it. And there was my wife, standing, on both feet. Dressed in fitted workout leggings and a jacket I didn't recognize, her hair pulled back, color in her cheeks I hadn't seen since before the accident. She wasn't leaning on anything. No railing, no cane, no wall for support. She was standing in the middle of a hotel room, laughing, both arms wrapped around a man in a gray suit who was hugging her back like the two of them had just won something. For one full second, I genuinely thought I might be losing my mind. The man in the suit looked to be somewhere in his mid-40s, silver at the temples, a leather folder tucked under one arm even mid-hug. Patricia was there too, seated in an armchair by the window, with a glass of what looked like champagne in her hand. Beaming at the pair of them the way a proud mother watches her daughter cross a graduation stage. Nobody had clocked me yet. I stood frozen in that doorway and watched my supposedly paralyzed wife rock up onto her toes to hug a stranger tighter, laughing at something I couldn't hear, while her mother raised a glass to toast them from an armchair. Then Emily's eyes found me over the man's shoulder. Her entire face changed. The laugh died somewhere in her throat before it could finish. Michael. That was all she got out before I stepped fully into the room. The man in the suit spun around fast, and I watched the color drain out of his face too. Patricia set her champagne down so quickly it sloshed onto the side table. I can explain. Emily's voice came out strange, too high, the voice of someone whose whole carefully built world had just taken a direct hit below the waterline. You can walk. It was the only thing my brain could produce. Not a question. Just a bare fact, spoken out loud, as if saying it plainly enough might make the universe rearrange itself back into something that still made sense. Michael, let me, you can walk, Emily, my voice climbed, and I didn't care who heard it through the open door. 7 months. 7 months I've watched you cry trying to get from the bed to the chair by yourself. 7 months I've carried you up our own front steps because the ramp contractor was 3 weeks behind schedule. I tore a doorframe clean out of our bathroom wall for you. And you're standing here, laughing, hugging some man in a suit like it's a celebration. It is not what you think. The man in the suit held both hands up like he was trying to talk down a cornered animal. I'm her attorney. Grant Delaney. You must be Michael. I'm the one who's been handling the situation with Bellwether. What situation with Bellwether? My voice went flat, because up until that exact second, Bellwether meant nothing more to me than the design firm my wife used to work at. Nobody answered right away. The silence told me more than any of them wanted it to. Sit down, Michael. Patricia used the tone she reserves for moments when she's convinced she's still running the room. There's context here you don't have yet. No. I stayed exactly where I stood. You don't get to sit me down for this. Emily, talk, now. She lowered herself, easily, both feet flat against the carpet, like a woman who had never once spent a day of her life in a wheelchair, into the armchair across from her mother. She looked smaller in that chair than I had ever seen her look in 9 years of marriage. And for one disorienting second the old instinct kicked in, the urge to cross the room and comfort her. I hated that instinct with everything in me. I let it pass without acting on it. I started getting real feeling back before autumn was even over. She stared down at her own hands rather than at me. Actual feeling, not just the tingling the physical therapist warned me about. By the following month I could stand on my own for a few minutes at a time. By November I was walking laps around our bedroom at night, after you left for your shift at the hotel. 4 months. She had been walking, in total secrecy inside our own house, for 4 straight months, while I broke my own body trying to pay off her recovery. Why? It came out as barely a whisper, which honestly frightened me more than the shouting had. Because if I could walk, you'd expect me to go back to work. And I can't go back to work, Michael, not to Bellwether. Not anywhere in this industry, probably ever again. Why not? Grant Delaney cleared his throat. Michael, as her attorney, I'd strongly advise. I don't care what you'd advise. I didn't move my eyes off Emily. I'm not your client. Emily, why can't you go back to work? So she told me. All of it, right there in that hotel room, with the housekeeping cart still parked outside the open door like the whole city was in on the joke except me. The $40,000. Her mother's gambling debts. The client accounts she'd quietly drained to cover them. Bellwether's furious private decision not to prosecute as long as she disappeared quietly and never worked in Pittsburgh's design industry again. All of it 8 months old. All of it unfolding underneath my own roof, while I thought the biggest problem in our marriage was a mother-in-law who alphabetized my spice rack out of spite. So the accident, I worked it out loud slowly, because my brain needed to hear it in order to actually believe it, was completely real. The accident was completely real. Her voice cracked for the first time since I'd walked in. I really could not feel my legs for months, Michael. I really thought I might never walk again in my life. And when I started getting better, I panicked. Being hurt meant I never had to explain the gap on my Ursum. It meant you never asked hard questions, because who interrogates a woman in a wheelchair about her old job? It meant Bellwether's lawyer, she gestured weakly toward Grant, stayed quiet, because going after a disabled woman publicly would have made the firm look terrible. My disability was protecting me from every single consequence of what I did, so I kept it going, even long after I didn't physically need to anymore, even after you didn't need to. For 4 months, while I worked myself half to death for a woman who could have been standing at our stove making dinner the entire time. I know how that sounds. It doesn't just sound bad, Emily. It is bad. I didn't know it yet, standing in that doorway, but the single worst part of that entire day wasn't even in that hotel room. It was still 3 weeks away from me. Grant Delaney, to his credit, looked genuinely uncomfortable being caught in the middle of someone else's marriage falling apart in real time. For what it's worth, he offered carefully, the restitution agreement isn't new. Emily signed it with Bellwether's attorneys before her accident ever happened. What we finalized today is the last installment, funded out of her monthly disability payments from the truck company's settlement. Her final payment cleared this morning. That's what you walked in on. Using the disability payments. My voice had gone dead calm now, which was somehow worse than shouting. The same monthly checks that were supposed to help pay for a wheelchair ramp. A second surgical consult in Cleveland. 4 months of physical therapy copays I've been putting on a credit card since the accident. Nobody in that room had an answer for that. Patricia, for the first time in the 9 years I'd known her, said absolutely nothing at all. Grant Delaney shifted his weight, clearly wishing he were anywhere else on the planet. For what it's worth, Michael, Emily never once asked me to keep this from you specifically. She told me you didn't know, and I assumed, wrongly I see now, that the two of you had at least discussed the financial side of things. We discussed the financial side of things constantly, I told him. Every single bill, every copay, every dollar I moved out of savings. What we never discussed was the fact that half of it was funding a lie. Michael, Emily's voice had dropped to something smaller, something that almost sounded like the woman I married instead of a stranger wearing her face. I was going to tell you. I kept telling myself I'd tell you once the Bellwether situation was fully closed. Once there was nothing left hanging over us. You don't get to explain this away as timing, Emily. You had 4 months of nights alone in that bedroom, walking laps, and every single one of those nights you made a fresh decision not to open our bedroom door and just tell me the truth. That's not bad timing. That's 4 months of choices. Patricia finally found her voice, though I almost wish she hadn't. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything you built. Michael, my daughter was protecting herself. She wasn't protecting herself from me. My jaw was tight enough that the words barely made it out. I'm the one who tore a doorframe out of a wall for her. I'm the one who worked 2 jobs so she wouldn't have to worry about a single thing. She was protecting herself from the truth. There's a difference, Patricia, and I think you know it. Patricia didn't have an answer for that either. For once in her life, she just looked down at her own hands, the same way her daughter had a few minutes before. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say anything dramatic on my way down the stairs. I found Ryan back at the front desk and told him something had come up, and I drove home in complete silence. No classic rock station, no cracked windows, just me and a version of my own marriage I no longer recognized. I didn't confront Emily again that same night. I sat in my truck in our driveway for close to 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside, and when I finally did, She was already back in the wheelchair. An old habit performed out of pure muscle memory, I think, because the second our eyes met across the living room, she seemed to realize how pointless it was and simply stood up out of it on her own, silently, and walked to the kitchen table instead. We didn't talk that night. I slept on the couch. I don't think either one of us slept much at all. What I did over the following 8 days, I did quietly, and I did it without telling Emily or Patricia a single word of it, because I'd learned something important in that hotel room in Shadyside. The people who had deceived me for months didn't deserve a shred of advance warning about what came next. Monday morning, before heading out to an electrical job, I called the truck company's insurance carrier directly, the same carrier that had been sending Emily's monthly disability payments since last fall, whose fraud reporting line was printed on the back of every one of those statements. I explained, calmly, that I had personally witnessed my wife walking without any assistance whatsoever, and that I believed those monthly disability payments had continued for months after her mobility genuinely recovered, based on medical information she deliberately withheld from everyone, including me. They opened a formal case file on the spot. They told me an investigator would almost certainly request updated medical evaluations, and that any monthly benefits paid out after her documented recovery could be subject to a full clawback, with possible criminal referral in serious cases. I'll be completely honest with you, I didn't make that call out of some noble sense of justice, not at first. I made it because I was furious, and because for 4 straight months, my wife had let me destroy my own back, carrying her up our front steps, while she was fully capable of climbing them herself. But somewhere around midweek, sitting in the office of a family law attorney named Wanda Ferris, who'd handled my cousin's divorce a couple years back, the raw fury settled into something calmer and considerably more useful: documentation. Wanda helped me understand my position clearly, in plain language I could actually use. Pennsylvania follows what's called equitable distribution, not an automatic even split, and a clearly documented pattern of financial deception: the withheld embezzlement, the concealed recovery. The diverted settlement funds would weigh heavily in my favor when it came to dividing what we owned, and whether I owed a single dollar toward any legal exposure she'd created with Bellwether. I was not required to shoulder any part of a debt she had hidden from me for the better part of a year. "Do you want this divorce to be ugly?" Wanda asked me, leaning back in her chair. "Or do you want it to be effective?" Effective, I didn't have to think about it. I've had enough ugly to last me a lifetime already. I filed for divorce 11 days after Shadyside. On the Wednesday, Wanda had walked me through my options. I moved my direct deposit to a new account Patricia had never had access to. I changed the locks on our house, a house that was, thanks to a mortgage I'd been the primary signer on since long before we married, legally mine to control during the separation, and I let the insurance investigation run its full natural course, without a single phone call to Emily begging her to make it stop. She tried to reach me, of course. She showed up at a job site of mine in Lawrenceville on a Friday afternoon, walking perfectly fine across a gravel driveway in a pair of heels, asking me to reconsider, telling me she still loved me, telling me the fraud claim could genuinely ruin her. "You should have thought about that back in the winter," I told her, standing there with a coil of wire still looped over one shoulder, "when you first started standing up out of that wheelchair and decided not to tell your own husband." 2 weeks into the investigation, a claims investigator named Robert Holloway came by the house, my house. Since Emily and Patricia were staying with Emily's aunt in Monroeville by then, packing up their things a few boxes at a time whenever I wasn't home. Holloway was polite, thorough, and clearly not new at his job. He asked me to walk him through exactly what I'd seen at the Harrow House Hotel, and I gave him the whole account, start to finish, without embellishing a single detail. I didn't need to embellish anything. The truth did all the work on its own. For what it's worth, Holloway told me on his way out, tucking a folder under his arm the same way Grant Delaney had that day in room 214, "These cases usually take months to build. This one's going to move fast. You gave us a specific date, a specific location, and a specific witness statement. That's more than most people ever hand us." "I didn't hand it to you to be helpful," I told him. "I handed it to you because I was done being the only one in that marriage who didn't know what was actually going on." He nodded like he'd heard some version of that sentence plenty of times before. thanked me for my time, and left. By early summer, Patricia had settled permanently with her sister in Erie, done with Monroeville, and done, as far as I could tell, with Pittsburgh altogether. As far as I know, she and Emily are still working through what's left of that $40,000 mess between the two of them, entirely on their own now. The insurance investigator's final report came back exactly the way I expected it would: documented mobility improvement by late autumn, full ambulatory function by mid-November, monthly disability payments accepted straight through March despite that recovery. Under the policy's fraud clause, the carrier clawed back 4 full months of those disability payments directly from Emily's account. The very same money she and Grant Delaney had used to finish quietly paying off Bellwether. It didn't touch the upfront portion of the settlement, the part that had actually gone toward the ramp and the door frame and the therapy copays, while she genuinely couldn't walk. But it did mean she never got to walk out of our marriage with a single dollar of the money she'd deceived me to help obtain after she could. I didn't know it yet, standing frozen in that hotel doorway, but the sweetest kind of justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it isn't a shouting match, or a slammed door, or a dramatic scene in a courtroom. Sometimes it's a quiet clawback clause, enforced months later by people who were never trying to hurt anyone at all, just trying to get the truth down on paper. The divorce was finalized in late June. I kept the house. I kept my truck and my tools, and, more importantly, I kept every single hour I used to spend behind that hotel front desk entirely for myself. I gave notice at the Kensington Grand 2 weeks after the papers were filed. I didn't need a second job anymore. I didn't need to run my own body into the ground for a woman who had let me believe a lie for 4 straight months while pretending she couldn't feel her own legs beneath her. Ryan still works at the Harrow House. We grab a beer every couple of weeks now, and every single time, without fail, he brings up that Saturday. I still feel bad about it, he told me last month, out on his back porch in Bloomfield, 2 beers sitting between us on the railing. If I hadn't asked you to come by that day, don't. I meant it. You didn't do a single thing wrong. You just happened to be standing near the door when the truth finally decided to walk out on its own 2 feet. He laughed at that harder than the joke probably deserved, but I think we both needed the laugh more than we needed the joke to actually land. These days I run my own small electrical contracting business, 3 trucks and 2 employees, and a waiting list I never thought I'd have the energy left in me to build after everything that happened last year. I sleep close to 8 hours most nights now. I cook my own dinners. Nobody alphabetizes my spice rack anymore, and honestly, I've come to enjoy the small chaos of finding the cumin exactly where I left it, wedged between the coffee and an old jar of paprika I really should have thrown out months ago. Last week, one of my guys asked me, half joking over lunch, if I ever thought about dating again. I told him the truth. Not yet, but not never, either. I told him the version of me who used to sit on the edge of a hospital bed and think I would do absolutely anything for this woman is still in here somewhere. He just learned, the hard way, that anything has a limit, and that limit is called honesty. I think about that hotel hallway sometimes. The laugh I recognized before the rest of my brain could catch up to what it actually meant. I've replayed it more times than I can count, and every single time I land in the exact same place. I'm not angry that Emily got hurt. I'm honestly not even angry anymore about the money. What I can't forgive, what I don't think I'll ever fully set down, is 4 months of watching me carry her up our own front steps. 4 months of letting me believe I was the strongest thing holding our family together, when the truth was she'd been standing on her own 2 feet the entire time, and simply chose, every single day, not to tell me. That's the whole story. Not a dramatic reveal in a courtroom. Not a scene where somebody throws a drink across a room. Just a quiet hotel hallway in Shadyside, an old friend's laugh drifting down a staircase, and a truth that had been walking around on its own 2 legs for 4 months, waiting patiently for somebody to finally see it standing up. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.